Mansfield.
I did the WWF games, so yeah, here's the WCW version. Of these, I only played one a fair bit as a wee youth kiddie child, and I didn't think it was awful at the time, though more on the reason why that probably was in a sec. The rest, well, there was some learning for me to do when making this video, and a learning I went. No dilly-dallying, here's the WCW games that came out on the PS1 from 1997 to Space Year 2000. 3 years, 5 games, 1 exclusive, and plenty of Sting! The first WCW tie-in on PlayStation hit in 1997, around the time Ted Turner's organisation was on the front foot in the Monday Night Wars. I watched both WCW and WWF in the late 90s, so this war thing has always been a bit silly to me, but hey. WCW was hot, and a video game version of the TV and pay-per-view action was the logical next step. Problem being, making a game is hard, and takes time, and isn't something you can just suddenly shunt out there to capitalise on a product being popular. Unless you grab a game that's already been made, rebadge it, tweak who's actually in it, and release it into markets it hasn't yet appeared in. And that's how WCW vs. the World was born, a localised and changed character and brand of wrestling fedized version of the Japan-only Virtual Pro Wrestling. And that's a name you might recognise. Because you see, the fun thing here was the developer, The Man Breeze. Not your boy Tyler. No, The Man Breeze was an early name for the developer that would become Sin Sophia, and before it became that, it would be Aki. Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 Aki, WCW NWO Revenge Aki, WWF No Mercy Aki. WCW vs. the World wasn't quite there yet though. Spoiler, it was the best WCW game on PS1, but also, in hindsight, it was very clearly a prototype of the greatness that was to come. The grappling system wasn't there, it was clunky, a word you'll hear a lot in this vid. The amount of counters you encountered was unbearable, match types were limited to one-on-ones, and the controls were just the wrong side of unresponsive and weird. It wasn't great. Plus, while the few WCW stars included were all correct of name, the leftover grapplers from the Japanese version all went under new false names. Which would be fine, were Hawk from the Road Warriors not renamed Overdose. WCW vs. the World ended up nothing more than a curio. It was a prototype. As the first Virtual Pro Wrestling, it was something to care about, and it was the first WCW game for 32-bit systems, and a PlayStation exclusive at that. So the game hit a couple of memorable notes there. The Man Breeze's Hogan 'em Up didn't do a totally awful job either. It could be quite good fun for a bit, and these days, as long as you don't go in expecting it to be much like what Virtual Pro Wrestling became, there's still a little bit of enjoyment to be found. So the best World Championship Wrestling game on PS1 was WCW vs. the World. But on balance, and thanks to the unsympathetic passing of time, it's a game that ended up falling by the wayside in the history books. "10 months after WCW vs. the World came this, a proper, built from day one WCW game full to the brim with many of the talent from the TV show it was named after, WCW Nitro. It was a step up in presentation, a more focused representation of the brand as a whole, and riddled with features that made it stand out from the crowd. Commentary, full motion video of the wrestlers, and But while Nitro was 10 months after vs. the World, it was only 2 months after the N64 release of WCW vs. NWO World Tour. And while history certainly hasn't been kind to Nitro, it's also fair to say in a contemporaneous setting the PS1 game was already massively on the back foot. Aki had been shunted to Nintendo's console by THQ, leaving an inexperienced American team by the name of Inland Productions to handle the deed for WCW Nitro. I'm sad for them, really. They didn't stand a chance. So, Nitro. This was the first WCW game I actually played as a kid on PlayStation, with the popularity of Monday Nitro at the time such that I genuinely wanted to give it a go. WCW never quite had the pizzazz of WWF for me, but it was a cool enough show that I wanted to take part in the gamified version of it. So I had it, I played it, I actually have fond memories of it. And I remember WCW Nitro as better than it was. It was not a good game. Though, somewhat amazingly, Tony Schiavone's commentary sounded more lifelike in the 1998 game than it does on 2023 AEW TV. But hey-ho. So what was wrong with me back in the heady days of 1998? I don't know. Maybe I just didn't care enough, so long as something had the wrestlers I liked included. Because WCW Nitro was genuinely a terrible game. Viewed as a fighting game, it was stilted, clumsy and unresponsive. There were no combos, no way of smoothly flitting from one move to another to skillfully take out your opponent. Nothing of substance. Viewed as a wrestling game? I'll give it some marks for presentation. Some, not a lot. Taking advantage as it did of the photos, the videos, some of the music, the rants, more on that in a minute, and the commentary. You were in no doubt this was a WCW game, an official representation of the hottest brand in televisual sports entertainment at the time. But after actually playing WCW Nitro, you were still in doubt as to whether it was a wrestling game or not. On paper, it was all there. Movesets for a variety of situations, strikes, grapples, signature maneuvers from the WrestleFolk, single matches, tag matches, dozens of talent on the in-game roster, alongside hidden extras like playable versions of Bobby Heenan and Tony Schiavone. But the second you started a match, it all became clear. This was bad. Very bad. Incredible amounts of input delay to contend with, confusing controls that asked for a series of button inputs to pull off moves but gave you no indication of if you'd actually got it right or not, except for when you finally did pull off that head scissors you thought you were going for, computer opponents who could seemingly just grab you as and when they wanted. I've said it was bad, but it was. It was bad. I didn't have an N64 at the end of 97 or early 98, whenever it was I got Nitro, so aside from replaying WWF's WrestleMania the arcade game once again, or putting myself through the horror of In Your House, I didn't have many options available to recreate the wrestling I was watching on television in video game form. So there's definitely a part of my history with Nitro that remembers it positively because, basically, I didn't have anything else to play at the time. But there was something that really did make Nitro amazing. Something that makes it amazing to this day. The god-awful wrestlers' rants put in there as an example of the mid to late 90s, hey, we have plenty of space on a CD-ROM, let's fill it with something approach to game development. So we got videos of the wrestlers cutting promos explaining to you, the player, why you should pick them. Some of the rants were basic.
This is why they call me the total package. Do you have a pain threshold to withstand the torture rack? Let's find out.
Some were dull.
You better be ready to wrestle. Because you know, when you're getting in the ring with Eddie Guerrero, it's going to be high-flying and exciting.
Some, like DDP's, were genuinely quite good.
Hey, monkey boy. Like there's a choice here? Good God! Pick the man with the plan. Pick DDP.
Meanwhile, some like Kevin Nash's show how unseriously this whole endeavor was being taken.
Hey there! How'd you like to get power bombed? Come on. Pick me. I'm begging you, pick me. Please pick me.
And some like Alex Wright make me happy to be alive with how absolutely lame they were.
Hey man, here's Alex Wright. If you want to have high-flying acrobatics and total wrestling action, pick me, and I show you what Alex Wright is all about.
WCW Nitro was, is, and forever will be a bad game. Once I'd spent some time with it again, I got used to its idiosyncratic approach to hitting moves on opponents, and I started to conjure up memories of the enjoyment I'd found 300,000 years ago. I started to understand why maybe it wasn't that bad again. Nah, it's rubbish. THQ by this point had a WCW game underway with Ukes on development duties, initially set for a late 1998 release. Titled WCW NWO Live, it was based on the dev studio's own Touken Retsuden 3, and was, well, either far or not far into development depending on who you listen to. Either way, WCW NWO Live was cancelled. THQ's deal with WCW lapsed in December of 1998, and with a 6-month grace period to get any projects the publisher had in the works out the door, it meant there was just time enough to squeeze out one more WCW-based title. But not from Ukes, no. That team would go along with THQ to tackle the WWF and WWE license. No, for THQ's last WCW effort on PlayStation, we were able to enjoy the talents of Inland Productions once more. So it was a year later we got Inland Productions' second ever and last ever wrestling game, WCW Nitro but better, WCW NWO Thunder. You know, based on the secondary WCW TV show nobody cared about, and after not much time at all, none of the big stars of the company bothered to appear on. Yeah, that one. Thunder sped things up a bit, added a few modes, padded out the roster a good deal more, including letting you play as a starfish. And the game brought in more of those wonderful, glorious rants. I've 4 things to highlight on those rants. Bret Hart and the British Bulldog called their company the WCW, clearly a hangover from saying the WWF for so many years.
The strongest wrestler in the WCW. Step in the ring with the greatest technical wrestler in the history of the WCW.
A few people in the roster still didn't understand this was a rant to make you want to pick them and not something related to fighting against them.
When you step into the ring with me, you are gonna find out what it's like when I put the apocalypse and drop you.
3. Roddy Piper's rant was absolutely the best because he was clearly next in line to record his after Kevin Nash.
Pick me! What's wrong with you? I heard Nash. Nash said don't pick me. Fine, because I can smash Nash. Pick Hogan? Put him to sleep 3 times. Pick me. You know why? Because everybody's got to pay the piper.
And 4th, all of these rants were quite clearly recorded at the nadir of Sting's substance abuse issues.
This is the Stinger, and I'm in the mood for handing out more than just one Stinger death drop.
But the game proper was the same thing again. Better than WCW Nitro, a wee bit more flow to things, thanks mainly to the pace being upped, but the basic approach was as it was in Nitro, with no huge development between the two. Cage matches, sure, tie-ups for grapples, as should be the case in wrestling games, made their first appearance, drowned out by the as and when from a standing start moves, of course. The tactics thusly changed little, because there weren't many tactics beyond learn some moves that work, spam them, do your finisher if you can be bothered, win. Where THQ was bossing it with WCW on N64, on PlayStation it was verging on a farce. WCW NWO Thunder, viewed purely as a sequel, devoid of all context, did things right. It ran better, it introduced new elements, it built on top of what came before it. It's just those foundations it was built upon were made of sand. And rants. But we didn't have to put up with it for much longer, as THQ dropped the House of Bish and jumped on Vinnie Mac's wild ride in order to craft some of the best wrestling games ever made. As mentioned, dragging Ukes along for the ride and completely ignoring Inland Productions, which was probably for the best. The WCW license, meanwhile, ended up with one of the world's biggest publishers and foremost creators of sports-related titles. What could possibly go wrong? And thus arrived Electronic Arts, taking over the World Championship Wrestling mantle and releasing the first of 3 straight-up wrestling games the studio would handle. Well, 1 straight-up wrestling game, this one weird gimmick wrestling game, more of that in a minute, and 1 licensed pile of poop. Maybe I should count the Def Jam games, but look, what I mean is EA has made 2 WCW games and 0 WWE games at the time I made this video, and that's pretty weird all things considered. Still, WCW Mayhem arrived with no small amount of hype, and I think it's fair to say no small amount of hope that the sport-flavoured big guns of the publishing world could turn out a true great, or at least the first step towards a true great, to rival the Aki WCW games on N64. And you know what? It was a decent first step. Mayhem wasn't a great game, but there was a strong enough foundation for whatever followed it to be at the very least half decent. But, well, we'll get to that. WCW Mayhem's presentation hit all the EA notes. Daft bombastic intro, all the arenas for TV shows, pay-per-views, whatever. 50 plus wrestlers including Arn Anderson and excluding Starfish from Thunder. A not entirely terrible creator wrestler mode, which I accidentally made the Butcher from AEW in. And potentially, I looked but I couldn't find any other wrestling game that had it, potentially the first appearance of backstage brawls in a wrestling game. Mayhem also tried to bridge the gap between the game and reality, offering the chance to enter special codes from WCW television in the game and recreate the cards from the specific event in question. It was abandoned after something like 3 months, sure, but it did exist. Relive those few short months at the turn of the millennium. Rants sadly didn't make their third appearance, but instead we did see a vaguely smarter collection of WCW talent. I mean, poor old NWO Black and White, Horace, Scott Norton, Stevie Ray, Eric Bischoff, and nobody else. But Goldberg was finally the biggest of the big in a WCW game. The aforementioned Arn Forcer was present and accounted for, and Bobby Eaton finally got a PS1 appearance. It's probably because he did some of the motion capture for Mayhem, but let's just pretend those making it really knew their wrestling and wanted to include the wrestler's wrestler. The man Goldberg wanted to lose his streak against. The guy who'd been with WCW the entire time the previous PS1 games had been coming out, but hadn't been featured before. Disco Inferno had been, obviously, no justice. WCW Mayhem was alright. No, not good. Not as good as Aki's WCW games or its first WWF game, which popped up a month after Mayhem. But EA's first pop was alright. It was a fresher take on things than the last couple of WCW releases and felt much more like a proper wrestling game. Lockups, signature moves, some form of entrances, and what have you. Still rough around the edges and with a lot of clunkiness taken away from what little flow there could have been, it struggled to drag too many eyeballs away from WWF Attitude, released the month prior. So Mayhem wasn't as good as the competition, and while it had its fans, it, with the benefit of hindsight, certainly didn't stand the test of time. But it was a fantastic place for EA to start out its WCW run, and as long as the dev team Kodiak Interactive stuck the course and didn't veer off into any daft gimmick to fit the Russo era of WCW, the studio's next release would surely be Mayhem, but better, and we would finally have a legit contender for the PS1 wrestling throne from Ted Turner's side of the fence. Kodiak Interactive, clearly under instruction from EA, veered off into a daft gimmick to fit the Russo era of WCW. WCW Backstage Assault should have built on what came before and been at least a vaguely decent wrestling game, even with the company's tepid TV output and threadbare roster by 1999. All it needed was to build on Mayhem and make something that could at least offer a viable alternative. Instead, we got a giant leap backwards. No tag team matches, no multi-person matches at all, not even any ring. All of the action was backstage, as though someone saw the excitement players had when Mayhem came around with its behind-the-scenes brawling and said, yes, this is correct, we shall do nothing but that also, I am a numbskull. It looked worse than Mayhem. Because of the janky-ass backroom areas being full of crap to pick up and use as weapons, it controlled worse. Collision detection was way off and inputs were often noticeably delayed. Creator Wrestler was downgraded to just changing outfits. Career mode was, well, boring crap to go with scientific terms. It's genuinely hard to believe WCW Backstage Assault, a sequel made by the same dev team as the last game, could be so shockingly poor compared to its predecessor. I mean, Thunder managed to be a bit better than Nitro, even if it was still TOS. 4 months after Backstage Assault launched, WCW was dead. And that was it for World Championship Wrestling in video game form. I can't say it burned brightly, but it definitely burned out. An EA follow-up, some magazines at the time calling it WCW Mayhem 2, was in the works for PS2, but the McMahon takeover put paid to that. On the plus side, I did punch Vince Russo in the dick so hard it bled. Best game of all time. Thank you as always to my patrons on Patreon. You can join them at the link below. They're the sort of people who steer me away from developing a life-altering substance abuse habit that results in me recording a weird, spaced-out rant on a video game. I'm off to watch Sting vs Jeff Hardy in TNA for absolutely no related reason at all. Bye!
Hey man, here's Alex Wright, the German. If you wanna know what the Germans are about, pick me, and you're gonna have a hell of a victory. I promise!